Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of Behind the Counter. I'm your host, Travis Everins, coming to you live from the second best game store in the country, Millennium Games in Rochester, New York today. I'm happy to have my guest. My first publisher guest is going to be Scott Gaeta from Renegade Game Studios. Scott's got a whole bunch of different games that are coming out and a pretty wide catalog. I've known Scott for a number of years, actually.
A lot of years, yeah.
Yeah, it's been... 15 maybe, probably closing in on 20, give or take.
A lot.
We're going to talk about Heroscape today. That's sort of the focal point, but I also want to give everybody sort of an update and sort of get to know who you are and what you're doing in the industry. So tell me a little bit about your journey into the board game publishing world.
So early in my game industry career, I actually was a retailer. I owned a store. I had a mail order business outside of the game industry that sold posters and other pop culture memorabilia. But yeah, I started a store in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and ran that for a little while. And it was almost like kind of a sideline thing to my real business, right?
Yeah.
And then Star Wars CCG was on the scene, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so we started running a lot of Star Wars tournaments. Pokemon hit a couple years later. So the CCG business was booming.
What a genius you were to decide to get in at that time.
Yeah, I mean, my crystal ball was working back then, and yeah, so we were growing. The store was growing, and we became a really well-known store for Star Wars CCG back then, and that got me and my shop on the radar of Decipher, who was making it at the time. And I started off as a contractor for them, for organized play programs and consulting on marketing things and sales incentives and programs that they could run in retail stores and stuff like that. And eventually they offered me a job, and I sold my store and moved to Virginia Beach and worked for them. And then I worked at a number of other companies. And my early career was very heavily focused on collectible card games, trading card games.
So Decipher, we got to play around with Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. What else did they have going on at that point?
Star Trek, and then some other stuff like Dot Hack, Beyblade.
Yeah, and then you went from there over to Upper Deck.
Yeah, then I went to Upper Deck, where it was actually kind of funny. The very first assignment that I got at Upper Deck was to fix Versus.
Nice.
Yeah, I was like, oh. And the ironic thing is that back when I was at Decipher and Versus had come on the scene and announced that they were going to do their pro circuit, right? They were going to try to compete with Magic and take lots of money and throw it into a prize pool. And I remember sitting there in a meeting and having a meeting internally because our staff was kind of freaking out a little bit, like, oh, this is going to put pressure on us. Like, this is going to become the new norm. How can we compete in this space? And I remember kind of mapping through it and going, this isn't sustainable unless this is a really hard nut to crack. That if you're going to give away $1 million every year in prizes, it costs $2 million to give away $1 million.
Yes.
Right? Like, you have all the production around it and everything else. And not coincidentally, by the time I got there, when they were in like year 3 or 4 of that game, I think it was year 3, it was fix this.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, so now it was my problem. But yeah, World of Warcraft there, a few other things here or there, but World of Warcraft was probably the biggest one. And then of course, Yu-Gi-Oh, though I wasn't too heavily involved in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Pretty good licenses. Got to play around with a whole bunch of stuff that like a lot of people like you never get a chance to kind of do that thing. So you got to do that. Spend some time, but at some point Renegade Game Studios comes online. Like it's your deal then. You're not working for somebody's not making a paycheck. You're the guy.
Yeah, so I started Renegade, kind of left. The intent originally was I wanted a break because I had been doing licenses for so long. That it was let's make things easier, right?
Sure.
Licenses are great, and working with third-party partners and IP owners is really fun. You get to play in somebody else's sandbox.
Yep.
but it's hard as well. So started Renegade, and we started the first few years with only original games, working with designers, and that was really fun. And really our transition or kind of getting back into license stuff it wasn't something I actively pursued. The very first one was Scott Pilgrim.
Yep.
And I didn't chase that. They came to me and said, hey, all these are generally people that I'd worked with at other studios and on licenses with in the past. And they knew my track record, so they just kind of came about. That's honestly how Hasbro started too.
Your
It started
proximity
because of
though
Power
too,
Rangers.
right? Like, so you moved Virginia Beach, you went to California. Hollywood is sort of there. There's a whole hub of publishers on the coast up to the top of it all the way down through, and it worked with those licenses and stuff like that. I think naturally people, if they see that your hands have been in and you've worked with other licensors, whether it's Lucas or any of those other places, they probably trust your ability to steward that sort of thing.
For sure. I mean, that's one of the hardest things when working with a licensor, is you have to realize that whatever it is you're doing is part of the bigger brand. And let's be honest, the reality of, if you're working on an A+ brand, what we do in the hobby game space is really tiny. So in the overall scheme of things. So
you're talking about their ledger, their accounting book, like where our line item is kind of lower. Yeah. Like
I would say that the biggest, most successful licensed third-party IP game in our space, in the overall scheme of things, is still a fan service level product that IP could certainly live without.
For sure.
Right. Like we are really valuable. And I mean, and we do engage with the most hardcore fans. But I think the golden rule is you can't be more trouble than you're worth.
Oh, I would agree.
And I think that's probably why that's one of the factors why a lot of stuff kind of came my way, is because I knew how to maintain that balance. Yeah. Put out really great stuff, amazing stuff, things that the fans really get excited about, things that being good at building community around those things. Those are the things that are valuable to that partner, but not being more trouble than more work.
So how do you get to the point where you have Heroscape? So Heroscape's something that there's a number of publishers in the industry that I had conversations as a retailer and as a fan of the game that, like, why don't you guys do something with Heroscape? And a lot of people were like, we would love to do something with Heroscape, but like being able to actually get it done. So it feels like, knowing where you're at now with Hasbro and your relationship with them, there was a lot of sort of build to get to that point where they're just like, try the Heroscape thing.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So how we kind of wound up with Hasbro was Power Rangers. Power Rangers was really the thing that got our foot in the door. And even that was a little bit just, right place, right time. We were working on Power Rangers with Saban when Saban owned the brand. And that was another similar situation where the head of product development and licensing at Saban for Power Rangers, I had worked with at another really big company in the past.
Sure.
And we had a very good relationship and, good reputation for putting out good quality stuff. So they had contacted me and said, hey, we're coming up on the 25th anniversary for Power Rangers. We don't have any products in the marketplace that support the adult fan, right? The show has been on the air for 25 years. It's never left. We have all these people now that are huge fans of the brand, and everything that comes out for Power Rangers is meant towards the acquisition audience, the core audience, which is kids. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. So, I've told this story before, like one thing led to another. Jonathan Ying had just left FFG at the time.
Yep.
And great at making cooperative strategy, kind of dudes on a map, right? Like games. And just so happened, I didn't know this at the time until we met. He's a massive Power Rangers fan. Like Power Rangers is like his thing, like Star Wars is to me.
Yeah,
right? Like Star Wars was my childhood.
It's funny when we see the different generational thing that they cling to. It was like the first time I ran into that, I think, was like when Imperial Assault had come out, and it was our Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker on the thing, and then like they announced the second one, it's Clone Wars, and I was kind of like, it's Clone Wars, it's Jar Jar and stuff like that. But it was like the next generation of my employees that are like, that's their Star Wars. So it's like, yes, I want this thing. So I would have way undersold it if it was just me part of that buying team.
Yeah. So really so then Hasbro acquired Power Rangers, and honestly we were like, we'll see how this goes, right? Like we knew that they were going to honor our contract. There was no question about that. But they liked what we were doing. They really, really liked that we didn't just put out games, we built community around the games, and we supported the games on a grassroots level, and right, like again, those are those things that they're hard to put a price tag on.
Well, and I think they have some of the people there have some mindset towards what that is, and probably the fact that you were willing to do that, not fun, not easy, structural stuff and managing that sort of stuff, and maybe they didn't have to do it, and they weren't concerned about your ability to be able to do it. It was probably you're right. There's no price tag that they could put on the headache or spinning up a department for that or dealing with it even as a side department. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah, and scale is a thing, right? Like we all deal with scale, and at their scale, this is not a good use of their time and resources, right?
Yep.
So that relationship grew. You know, it opened up into things like Transformers and G.I. Joe and My Little Pony, and then Avalon Hill.
Sure.
They said, do you think that you could do something with Axis and Allies? Like Axis and Allies is a great brand, but it's kind of small in the overall scheme, right? At their
small
scale.
on their ledger, you know.
Yeah, right. And putting out, and so they basically, the process has been, they'll come to me and say, what do you think about this? Could you put together a plan and we could discuss if this will be a good fit for you, a good fit for them, and then it kind of goes from there. And it was similar with Heroscape, though I would say I think I brought it up first.
Sure.
I think I had talked to them about it, and they were running the HasLab campaign, and after about a week or so, it got off to a really good start, and then it just kind of
a lot more than
right?
some of the
Slowed
other
down
stuff. I felt like the other stuff kind of did the same thing that we see in crowdfunding, right? Like I got the HeroQuest one, right? And I feel like the final days of HeroQuest, it was like the Jabba's Barge was the same thing. I got the Sentinel at home. Is like, I'm a sucker for all of those things, and I saw the same thing with that campaign, and it was like, that's weird that it lost steam there. It doesn't seem like it should have been that way.
Yeah, and I mean,
did you have any hesitation when you watched that, like having the opportunity to be able to do that, or did you think, oh, you know what, there's probably more chops, or there's probably more avenues that they should be touching base with that I have the opportunity to do that with?
So that was my gut feeling, was that something here, something, whether it went wrong or just like they weren't reaching the people that were really into the brand in the past, but also, part of me was like, maybe that's it. Maybe that's all there is.
Well,
right? Like,
my gut as a business person, I would. You got to take a gamble. Plastics is not a cheap venture to get into.
No. And now the one thing that was interesting about the history of Heroscape, and at the time I didn't have any data to back this up, but I had my observations from kind of being around when it had its first go around. Even I was in the industry, but not working like in miniatures. Heroscape was my perception was, it was massive at mass market, right? I remember going into stores and whole islands of Heroscape, Toys R Us, Walmart, and Target. And the other piece of that was it wasn't available in hobby stores.
Right.
There was no direct distribution into hobby stores. The hobby stores that got Heroscape either had it in with a company that had a toy account, or was buying it on the secondary market and reselling it
towards the end of that run, we were allowed to order the Marvel Core, and then there was some wave. Occasionally, Wizards would solicit us Wave 8, and we'd have to buy it by the case, which nobody had ever heard of at that point and stuff. But I mean, the thing that was sort of compelling to me was it was the first time in sort of that miniature big box space where it was like there were different exclusives at the big box stores. Right?
Yeah.
Like you could only get the fire over here, and you could only get the ice over here. And like there weren't brands really around at that time where that thing was sort of happening. That hadn't really been a deal. And like, even with digital games, it wasn't a thing. And that was sort of the first thing. So my thought on it was, okay, if these companies are actually fighting for exclusives and molds and models and things like that, there's got to be something to it,
Right. Yep, exactly. So all the signs pointed towards, and it could be good. And honestly, right, if you've ever played the game, it's incredibly accessible and it's really easy to pick up. So I really like that about it. There's two versions of the game, right? Like there's the beginner, the side of the cards, which is great for young players, families, whatever. But then there's the master side of the cards, and that's like where the meat of the game is, right? And that's what most of the player base plays. So it had all the qualities of a good game, even if there wasn't as much momentum from the past to kind of push it forward. I thought that there was at least something there, and it was worth giving a try. And then as the process kind of continued with them, and I put together a proposal, and they were able to share historical data, then it was like,
got real interesting.
I got some insight into how many people in the past actually probably ever played this game and touched this game. And those numbers are huge. They're
so how long was it between like the last sort of releases that they had done? Because I remember, and it was sad because we got the Marvel Core, and then they showed us some teasers on what the first packs were sort of going to be, and then we just never saw those ever again, and that sucked.
Right.
How much time had gone since they sort of had ended their business there, and you guys had finally gotten to the point where you'd done the release?
So for us, the history in the past was the game came out I think it was late 2003, early 2004, right? Like I think maybe it hit Christmas or something, 2003. The core run under Hasbro proper, like Hasbro Gaming, I think it might have been a Mattel branded product at the time, right? That was about 4 or 5 years. And that's when that was really its heyday in big box and everything else. Then they moved the brand to Wizards of the Coast, and that's when you saw some more Heroscape proper releases. But you saw there was the D&D set, there was the Marvel set, and then around 2012, 2013, it wasn't really branded Heroscape, but they even did a couple Magic releases.
Oh,
that
right.
Used some of the engine, but got rid of the plastic terrain in a big way, and it was kind of a hybrid sort of a thing, and it wasn't really branded as part of the Heroscape line, but it was like a first cousin.
Duel of the Planeswalkers.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And that was 2013. So it's been, we just had, this was the 20th anniversary this year, and it's been about a decade since there has been anything new in the market for it.
And in terms of where it's been right now, has it met your expectations? Has it exceeded your expectations? Is it right about where you thought it was going to be? Like, where was your gut in terms of that? Now, I know as far as me as a retailer being able to get as much supply as I wanted after I'd already gotten my initial, I'm having a harder time doing that, which tends to mean that it probably overproduced what you thought it was going to be. I know at Gen Con when we talked about it, you were happy.
Yeah. So it exceeded. We printed what we thought was enough product for 6 months. Run if it was successful, right? We were like, if this hits and it's successful, this should get us through the end of the year.
Going to carry you through Christmas, all the way through Chinese New Year, and by the time we get to Gamma, you'll be just at the phase. Yeah. Right.
So the battle box was allocated. The tree pack was allocated. Not crazy allocations, but like 15% or so. Yeah. So we were oversold on those. And now the next print run of the battle boxes. So here's the spoiler, right? Like here's the tip. The battle box reprint we got going back at Gen Con.
Smart.
It's arriving soon. It's sold out. Like we have enough orders that it's going to be sold in, right? Like we'll have no inventory left. We already have a third printing of that battle box that will arrive right after the first of the year.
Okay, so for clarity for people that are tuning in, because occasionally what happens is we hear these terms and we're a retailer, we're a consumer, and we think, oh, sold through wave 2, wave 3, what does this mean? Did he already sell 18 months worth of what he thought he was going to sell, or so on and so forth? So to put an actual number on what you've been through, was that initial that your 6-month production on the first wave, you reprinted into second, that sold through and you're starting your third. So how much from the first place that you started, what did you think that was going to be for total sales for what you were putting through the line?
Let me see if I understand what you're asking. I mean, to give you some context, so the first reprint of the battle box was about 25% of what we printed for the initial first 6 months.
There you go.
And that's sold in.
Okay.
So sold out, right? Like sold out from the publisher level. It still has to. You guys still.
We still have to sell it, right? And they still have to buy it.
It still has to sell through.
Yeah.
Yeah. For you, and we need to get it in the hands of gamers. I mean, that's why a lot of our marketing, or a big focal point of our marketing, was those 500 stores that bought in at a higher level and got the demo table and the kit and everything and the figures to give away. Those stores, part of the condition of that program for distributors to participate with us is we needed a list of all of those stores, because if the Heroscape store locator to start was just those stores, and we're running paid advertising that store locator, find Heroscape near you, and driving on the consumer level people to find a store in their area. So to start, it was those 500 stores. Now we're adding to that store locator based on, again, data that we're requiring distribution to share with us, stores that have bought, the thresholds are low, over a couple $100 worth of Heroscape in the last 3 months. Give us those new stores.
It was laughable when I looked at the first threshold. I'm like, you kind of can't carry a miniature line to try to do anything with it for at least this minimum amount anyway. Like,
Right.
what kind of
Right.
community are you building? So yeah, we got a
Yeah.
demo table out there and we're giving away the stuff. But I mean, you can slow down and add in the number of stores if you'd like. Like, I think 500 is
Right.
just a good number to have on there. We don't need to add any more numbers there that could shop from.
It won't be crazy. You know, the other metric that we're working on is we want to be able to support stores that run organized play, because we just know that's going to drive sales for you and for us, right? That's where communities are being built, and people will play a game.
With
And
the
it's
sales,
not that
with the sales
ahead.
being as they are, so further than what you would thought, or more aggressive than what you thought, has that changed sort of what you guys had looked at initially for a roadmap for organized play? And like my friend Justin always says, organized play only costs you money until it doesn't, right? So the idea is you get a game to big enough where the cost of the organized play is sort of baked into the cake already, because there's enough fans, there's enough people doing it. I mean, your pedigree in the industry, you know the difference between, you know, maybe when we just threw too much of a treasure chest at something versus not enough, and then everything in between. So has this enthusiasm for the game changed sort of what you guys thought you were going to do? Has it put any pressure on your team in general to say, oh, you know what, we need to take maybe a wider strategy look at this, or has there been any adjustments based on what you thought?
So not tremendous adjustments. We're not going to there's no cruise prizes or giant, right?
You're not doing $1 million Heroscape sealed event?
No.
Sorry, guys.
I think that I think that really at the heart of it, Heroscape is going to be primarily played on people's kitchen tables.
Agree.
Yep. Right. Absolutely. So there's no concept of like, oh, we're going to have like 500-person tournaments in all these stores. But what we want to do is we want to give people the chance to join a community if they don't have a kitchen table game. We want to give stores a mechanism to build and support community and add value to them as a destination to buy Heroscape, right? Because you can support it, and that doesn't necessarily mean organized play. So we do have programs coming out in the past to continue the gift with purchase model for promo miniatures, where if somebody comes into your store and they buy a Heroscape SKU, you give them a promo miniature that's unique. It's not I mean, there might be some cosmetic things in the future, but right now those figures are gameplay exclusive and they can only get them by coming into a store. So we want to add value there. So I just see organized play as another layer of adding value to the program. It's not necessarily the driver, but it's one of the drivers, right?
I think your timing as far as what the market wanted and what the market needs was pretty flawless too. I mean, when I'm looking at the overall greater landscape of miniatures games in general right now, there's Games Workshop, and you know they have a lead on everybody else below them. It's the same lead that D&D has on everybody else below them.
Right.
You know, it just is a wide open market, you know, and at the time when you're making a decision on this, maybe you're not looking at it the same way. There's Legion, and then all of a sudden they announce Shatterpoint, and you think there's an X-Wing game, and there's Armada, and you know there's a Star Trek thing coming from WizKids, and they're relaunching War Machine and things like that. So it looks like it's a really, really busy space. But the reality of it is pre-painted or easily painted plastic stuff with an easy onboarding mechanism and that sort of thing, with a brand that's familiar to a handful of people that could really, really love the stuff and have garages full of it to begin with. I mean, it's something that pre-launch and still now, we didn't deal with a lot of used stuff, but when people would bring in a tub of Heroscape stuff, we would just buy it and put it on the shelf. And it would sell it in sandwich bags, and it would go just fine because Battletech players are using the terrain and that kind of thing, and there's Heroscape players, and people are using it for their homebrew D&D and that kind of stuff. So the versatility on it is really good, and the value, you know, gosh, if I look back at what the cost of those original core sets are, it's like it's out of control to me what they were doing plastic for back then.
I mean, that's like a whole different time, right? Like can't replicate as 20 years ago, but I mean it's so far it's been really good. We've our sell-in, and for the most part from wave one, everything that you know we're talking to distributors into stores and everything, the sell-through has been very good, and we've exceeded that HasLab number by many times, right? So we were successful in reaching the old guard and bringing them back, and a lot of them never went away. There's a couple conventions they're small, like 100 people, called ScapeCon that are run every year, that the fans had been putting on for the last decade. Like that, the game never died as far as they were concerned, and they've just been playing it all along.
So we just hired a part-time guy that's working in receiving up at Game Center in Roseville. And when the manager hired him, he talked to me about the fact that he's got, 10, 15 years of tabletop event organization experience. So when I was there 2 weeks ago, I was having a conversation with him. Well, lo and behold, he's part of one of those groups. Like they had a gaming club and stuff that was going on that people, it rotated the space on where it was. They were in a VFW for a little bit and so on and so forth. But he's got like 30 or 40 active Heroscape players in between the Twin Cities area. And I'm like, well, come on down. I said, in fact, I'm talking to Scott today on my podcast. So let me know what you want to do. We will hook something up,
And honestly, the community has been one of the best resources and parts of this whole relaunch, because there's this faction of people that just never left the game and have been so passionate about it and playing it for so long. We've been able to tap into them, and they've helped us with map designs for competitive events, and giving us feedback on organized play structures and all sorts of stuff. We're tapping into that and we're supporting them. We donated after Gen Con this past year a pallet of terrain because they were having ScapeCon a week later in that area, and we just gave them piles of terrain. It's like, add it to your library so you can add maps. Like, why not? Like, we want people playing the game wherever they want to play.
100%.
Like,
it is one of the things that we think about operationally on a retail level of how do you kind of bridge that gap. When I was dealing with the stuff that we were dealing for organized play for Onslaught, it's sort of the same thing. Like, it's not as easy sometimes as it is with GW, where you just throw out the map and I've got terrain in a bucket and stuff like that. Like, I have to have this tub of stuff and I have to set up the map, and the map has to have specific hexes, because the hexes matter as far as distance goes and range of weapons and where they're going to hide and line of sight and stuff like that. So it is a layer of challenge that ends up kind of coming down for some of that stuff. I mean, it thus far though, it's been great. We've had a great reception here. I mean, I'm sure, because I'm familiar with groups that are legacy groups and stuff like that, there's probably been a little bit of push-pull as far as that community goes too. There's probably some people out there that think you're the greatest thing in the entire planet, and there's other people that think that you killed Heroscape, even though you relaunched Heroscape.
Well, yeah, I mean, right, like I've been part of those groups.
Yeah.
When you have something you love and it kind of gets turned over to the players, the fans, whatever, and it becomes your thing because the official source isn't supporting it anymore, you have a sense of pride and ownership in it.
Yeah.
And then to have it come back, I'm sure for some people it's bittersweet, because they were like, well, we were getting to do whatever we want with it.
We are the Heroscape Council of Authority. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really fun. So, we want the best of both worlds as much as we can.
Sure.
At the end of the day, our goal is to have all those people that played, hundreds of thousands of people that played Heroscape in the past play Heroscape today if they want, but we also know that we have to bring in new players, right? Like, we have to grow it. And why wouldn't it grow? Like, at this point, the gaming industry, the core, hobby market is so much bigger than it was 20 years ago.
Oh, without a doubt.
Right? So the potential's there. The potential's great.
So let me selfishly hit you with some rapid fire questions about publisher retail relationships before we wrap up. How do you view the role of the friendly local game stores in promoting your titles compared to online sales?
So online sales, to me, is very much the way I even interact with them personally. It's convenience shoppers, right? Like, everybody has different motivations when they buy something. And I find that most people that purchase online are purchasing for convenience and or price. It's just the way it is. I think that everything has a place in the ecosystem, right? But as far as hobby retailers go, like, hobby retailers are our partners much more so than an online seller, right? An online seller is providing a service and, to a certain segment of people. But a hobby store, game store they're the best people equipped to actually represent anything that we make, right? Because the people in those stores, right, like, they are the most equipped. It's kind of like the way I compare where I used to go to Home Depot, and I could walk down an aisle in Home Depot, and if I had a question about painting or plumbing, the guy that I was talking to was probably a painter or a plumber,
right,
or had experience in that space. And I couldn't get that level of service just going to another big box store that happened to have a hardware section. Right. And that's kind of the way I see game stores, hobby game stores. Like, you guys are specialists, and you're providing an invaluable resource where a consumer, especially a new consumer, that their head is spinning because they see this gaming thing happening and they think it's really cool and they want to get into it, they need somebody to guide them, right?
Yeah,
and
with some expertise. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
What one piece of advice would you give a new game store owner today?
Look at your financing and your funding when you open. Don't open on a shoestring credit card. If you want to just be kind of like a card game shack, that's a choice. I don't think it's a good choice, but it's a choice. I think the market now is so much better than it was, say, like when I opened my store in the 90s. When I opened my store in the 90s, the market was small, right? It was a niche. We were a cottage industry. We were not mainstream like board games and just tabletop games are now. Don't sell yourself short, right?
Yeah.
Like go in, you don't have to be the Millennium and open up with every game under the sun in your selection. Curate, but don't open up with, the IKEA shelf and your collection.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That would be my advice.
So we got 9 hours left on our Welcome to Night Vale backer kit campaign. We're looking at about $500,000 with 6,200 backers, give or take. That's exciting. What other cool things should we be looking at as far as the Renegade catalog goes in maybe the next 3 to 6 months?
So next year we'll have 72 new SKUs.
72.
Total. Yeah. So that's down a little bit. This year we were at like 84. So we're tightening things up a little.
Yeah.
I would say lots of new stuff coming from the existing lines, right? Heroscape. There's new Risk SKUs. There's new things in the Avalon Hill catalog. But probably one of the things I'm most excited about outside Night Vale for RPGs is definitely like the kind of the new hotness, and it's really fun because that is bringing people into the RPG space that are adjacent to it, right? They enjoy storytelling and that sort of narrative experience, and hopefully we'll create some new gamers out of that. But Unstoppable is probably the other one that I think is really cool. It's a card crafting game, John DeClaire, but it's part of our Solo Hero series, so it's a solo game, and like Dan Bojanowski's been playing with pack out checks, and you can't shut him up in our Slack. Like he's just like, yeah, so I did the pack out check and I wound up playing Unstoppable for 4 hours.
John's stuff, whatever I play of his stuff is so good. Like the amount of time that I've spent playing his games in the last 2 years is probably more than maybe any other designer out there, just because I'm playing a lot of times with family members and stuff like that. This stuff is so approachable and so easy to play, and there's but there's still enough, it's such a trope. There's still enough game in there for me as a gamer that I can pick apart some stuff and play around with some systems and do some really fun stuff. Very cool. So if anybody wanted to reach out to you guys as a retailer or as a consumer, where would they go to find you?
So renegadegames.com is our primary site, and that's the hub for everything. If you want to find more information on Heroscape or Access Now Eyes or anything, there's badges across the top of the site. You can just go quickly to mini sites that support those brands. If you're a retailer, we do have a Facebook group just for retailers. We have newsletters just for retailers. We do have a mirrored version of our e-commerce platform that is just for retailers. It's password protected. You need to set up an account to get on there, but then you can purchase direct from us if that's something that you want. It's not something we really push, but it's available. But almost more importantly, there's promo items on that site. A lot of them are just free. Like you might pay the shipping on them and stuff, but you can just order promo items for a lot of different games as a retailer off of our retailer only site and get those and use them in your store for organized play or gift with purchase or promotions or whatever you want.
That's great, especially coming into, Black Friday is right around the corner and stuff like that. We're all looking for different promotions and ways to kind of, set the table for that. And with Small Business Saturday the following day as well, like we're trying to find that as well. That is fantastic. Well, you going to stick around for like 20 minutes? We'll do an AMA after this.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you coming in. That's Scott Gaeta from Renegade Game Studios. I'm Travis Severance from Behind the Counter, and we'll see you next time. Happy gaming.